It is a winter night, 20,000 years ago, and something is watching you from the dark. You are pressed as close to the fire as the heat will allow, because the cold beyond it can kill you before dawn. Out past the light, you can see its eyes. A wolf, 100 pounds of muscle and teeth, built to bring down animals far larger than you. It has shadowed your band for days, drawn by the smell of your kill. Every instinct you have says one thing: drive it off or die. You have no idea that you are looking at the most important animal your species will ever meet. Because at some point, a human exactly like you did not reach for a rock. They tore off a piece of meat, and they threw it into the dark. And that single decision is the reason dogs exist. So how did humans turn a wolf, an apex predator that hunted the very same prey we did, into the animal asleep on your couch tonight? The answer is stranger than anyone expected, and it starts with a fact that should not be true. The dog is the first living thing humans ever domesticated. Not the cow, not the sheep, not wheat. The dog. Thousands of years before we planted a single seed, while we were still nomads scraping survival out of the Ice Age, we reached into the dark and made a wolf into family. Every other domesticated animal on Earth came after farming. The dog came first. And the reason why rewrites who was really doing the taming. For roughly 95% of the time our species has existed. We domesticated nothing. Not plants, not animals, not the land. We spent hundreds of thousands of years as mobile hunter-gatherers, owning only what we could carry, taking the world exactly as we found it. And then, right at the end of that long stretch before farms, before fields, before a single permanent house, we did something no human had ever done. We took a wild animal and made it ours. And of every animal on Earth we could have started with, we chose the most dangerous option on the board. Think about that for a second. When humans finally did tame animals for food, sheep, goats, pigs, cattle, they chose herbivores. Prey, nervous, manageable creatures already used to being chased by something bigger than them. That is the sensible way to begin. You do not start your career as an animal tamer with a carnivore that outweighs you, outmuscles you, hunts in coordinated packs, and kills for a living. But that is exactly what we did. Before the safe choices, we made the terrifying one. The date is still fought over, and the fight is not gentle. Genetic studies place the split between dogs and wolves somewhere between roughly 40,000 and 15,000 years ago, deep in the last ice age. Robert Wayne, an evolutionary biologist at UCLA, whose lab spent decades sequencing canine genomes, put it plainly, the domestication of the dog happened before the agricultural revolution, when people were still hunter-gatherers. Every other barnyard animal entered our lives after we settled down and had grain to protect and scraps to spare. The dog walked in while we were still following the herds. And here is the part that quietly rearranges the whole story. The wolf we actually tamed is gone. Line up every dog alive today, the wolf-sized ones, the ones that fit in a handbag. The ones bred into shapes evolution would never have allowed and traced their ancestry back far enough. And it does not lead to the gray wolf you would see in a nature documentary. It leads to an extinct population of Ice Age wolves that has no living members. The gray wolves that share the planet with us now are not the ancestors of your dog. They are its cousins. The actual ancestor died out, which means somewhere in the deep past, we domesticated a ghost. That single fact reframes the mystery. This was not modern humans taming modern wolves. This was one now vanished population of Pleistocene wolves and one small population of Ice Age humans meeting on a frozen landscape and forming a bond so successful that it outlived the wolf that started it. But why would it happen at all? On paper, humans and wolves were not partners waiting to be introduced. They were rivals. Both were pack hunters. Both were social, territorial, and intelligent. Both wanted the same deer, the same horse, the same reindeer carcass on the same cold plain. Two apex predators competing for identical prey do not usually become friends. They usually become enemies. So the real question is not just how we did it. It is why the wolf led us. The most widely cited answer does not begin with a brave hunter capturing a wolf pup. It begins with garbage. Picture the edge of a human camp during the Ice Age. Wherever people butchered animals and cracked bones for marrow, they left waste reeking. Calorie-rich pile of scraps at the boundary between the firelight and the dark. To a wolf, that pile was a gift. Free food, no hunt required. But there was a catch. To eat it, a wolf had to do the one thing every instinct screamed against: get close to humans. Most wolves couldn't. The fear was too strong. They kept their distance and stayed hungry. But wolves are individuals, and in every population, a few are bolder than the rest. A few could tolerate a human at 50 paces, then 30, then 20. And those slightly braver, slightly calmer wolves got the calories. They survived leaner winters. They raised more pups. And those pups inherited the one trait that had paid off: a shorter fuse of fear around people. This is the commensal scavenger hypothesis, argued most forcefully by the biologist Raymond Coppinger, who spent his life studying dog behavior. Commensal means one species benefits and the other is neither helped nor harmed. The wolf got the scraps, the humans at first barely noticed. And the crucial point is what was being selected for: not strength, not hunting skill, not size. The trait that determined which wolves ate and which starved was tolerance of humans. Tameness itself became the path to survival. Not everyone thinks it was this passive. Some researchers argue humans took a more active hand capturing wolf pups and raising them deliberately. It is a real and serious alternative, and the honest answer is that we cannot yet be sure. But the scavenger route has one powerful thing going for it: it does not require anyone to have had a plan. It only requires wolves, garbage, and time. Generation after generation, the boldest wolves ate best and bred most. The distance between wolf and human shrank, one meal at a time. Nobody planned it. Nobody trained anything. The wolves were domesticating themselves. And that leads to the reveal that flips this entire story on its head. We tend to tell it as a story about human mastery, clever, dominant humans capturing and breaking a wild beast to our will. But a growing body of evidence says that is almost exactly backwards. Brian Hare, an evolutionary anthropologist at Duke University, who has spent his career studying dog cognition, made the case in his work on what he calls survival of the friendliest. The wolves that became dogs were not the strongest or the fiercest. They were the friendliest, the ones least afraid of us, the ones whose own tameness selected them, long before any human decided to select anything. In other words, we may not have chosen the dog at all. The dog chose us. That is a genuinely humbling idea. The most consequential partnership in the history of our species, the animal that would go on to herd our flocks, guard our children, pull our sleds, find our lost, sniff out our diseases, and sleep at the foot of our beds for tens of thousands of years, may have begun not with human genius, but with a handful of unusually calm wolves who decided we were worth the risk. But an idea like that needs proof. It is a nice story that friendliness alone can turn a wild predator into a companion. Can we actually watch it happen? As it turns out, yes, because in a fur farm in Siberia, someone spent 60 years doing exactly that. In 1959, a Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev began one of the most quietly astonishing experiments in the history of biology. At the Institute of Cytology and Genetics in Novosibirsk, Siberia, he wanted to understand how wolves became dogs. But he couldn't run the experiment on wolves, it would take too long. So, he chose a close relative that breeds every year, the silver fox, a variant of the red fox, taken straight from Soviet fur farms. His method was ruthless in its simplicity. He started with around 130 foxes, and he selected for one thing and one thing only: tameness. Each generation, his team would approach the foxes and score how calmly each one tolerated a human hand. The tamest 10% and only the tamest were allowed to breed. Not the biggest, not the healthiest, not the prettiest, just the friendliest. The single question was, will this fox let a person near without fear or aggression? Belyaev's colleague, a young researcher named Ludmila Trut, took over the work and has run it for more than 60 years. The result came faster than anyone expected. Within just a few generations, foxes began appearing that actively sought out human contact, that whimpered when their caretakers left, wagged their tails when people approached, and licked the hands that fed them. A fox tame enough to be called, in the project's own words, an elite of domestication, showed up by around the fourth generation. Selecting for friendliness alone, in a handful of years, had begun turning a wild animal into something that behaved like a pet. But here is the part that stopped scientists cold. Belyaev never selected for looks. He only ever selected for temperament. And yet, as the foxes grew tamer, their bodies started to change on their own. Ears that had stood sharp and upright began to flop. Straight tails began to curl. Solid coats broke out in patches of white piebald spotting, the same kind you see on so many dogs. Some foxes developed shorter snouts and rounder faces. None of it was chosen. It came free, riding along with tameness, as if friendliness and floppy ears were somehow wired into the same underlying switch. Biologists call this cluster of traits the domestication syndrome: floppy ears, curly tails, patchy coats, juvenile features, and it shows up again and again across domesticated animals, from dogs to pigs to horses. Think about what that means for our wolves. If selecting for nothing but friendliness can, in a few decades, start reshaping a fox's ears, tail, and coat, then the transformation of a wolf into a dog does not require a plan, or a project, or a genius. It requires only one pressure, applied patiently over time. The friendly survive. Belyaev compressed into 60 years what the edge of our campfires did over 10,000. The floppy-eared, curly-tailed, patch-coated animal on your floor is what tameness looks like when you let it run. So we know roughly how it happened, and we can watch a version of it in real time. But two of the simplest questions turn out to be the hardest to answer. Where did wolves first become dogs? And how many times did it happen? And this is where the honest science gets messy, which, if you have watched this channel before, is usually where it gets interesting. For years, researchers were split into camps. Some argued dogs first arose in East Asia. Others pointed to Europe or the Near East. In 2016, a large international team led by Laurent France and Gregor Larsen at the University of Oxford threw a bone into the middle of the debate. They sequenced the complete genome of a dog that died around 4,800 years ago. Its bone recovered from the Neolithic passage tomb at Newgrange in Ireland, and compared it against dozens of ancient and modern dogs. They found a deep ancient split separating East Asian and Western dogs and proposed something radical. Maybe dogs weren't domesticated once. Maybe they were domesticated twice, independently, at opposite ends of Eurasia, from two different wolf populations, with the two lineages later mixing as dogs and people moved across the world. It was an elegant solution to why everyone had been arguing. Maybe everyone was a little bit right. But the case did not stay closed. Krishna Virama, a population geneticist at Stony Brook University, and his colleagues tried to replicate the analysis and reported finding errors, including a sample that had accidentally been counted twice. Their own work suggested a simpler picture, a single domestication, with the east-west split happening later, perhaps around 20,000 years ago. Larsen himself later acknowledged the 2016 findings were never meant to be irrefutable. So which is it? One origin or two? The honest answer, as of now, is that we do not know. The bones are fragmentary, ancient DNA degrades, mutation rates are uncertain, and the deep past does not keep clean records. What almost everyone agrees on is narrower, but still remarkable. It happened during the Ice Age, before agriculture, somewhere across Eurasia, from a wolf population that no longer exists. The exact address is lost. The event is not. Whatever the map turns out to be, something happened next that is easy to miss and impossible to overstate. The dog did not just change its behavior to fit our world, it changed its body, and so, in a quieter way, did we. As human diets slowly filled with something wolves almost never ate: starch, in the form of grain, bread, porridge. The scraps of a carbohydrate-heavy table the dogs living alongside us adapted at the level of the genome. In 2013, a team led by Erik Axelsson at Uppsala University in Sweden published a study in the journal Nature, comparing the genomes of dogs and wolves. They found that dogs carry extra copies of a gene called AMY2B, which produces the enzyme that breaks down starch on average, a roughly 7-fold expansion compared to wolves. In plain terms, dogs evolved the biology to thrive on the food we throw away. The wolf is a meat specialist. The dog became a creature that could live on our leftovers. That is coevolution, written directly into DNA. As our tables filled with starch, our dogs became able to eat like us. They quite literally reshaped their guts to stay by our side, and we reshaped our lives around them. Dogs took over the night watch, alerting sleeping camps to danger long before a human sense could. They multiplied the success of the hunt, tracking wounded game across ground no human could read. Later, they herded the very animals we domesticated after them, guarded them from the predators the dog's own ancestors had been. We did not just acquire a tool, we acquired a partner that made everything else we did possible, and it arrived before almost everything else we would ever build. But utility does not explain the couch. It does not explain why you talk to your dog, or why it presses its head into your hand, or why losing one can feel like losing a person. For that, we have to look at something happening inside both of your bodies, a mechanism that turns out to be far older and far deeper than affection. In 2015, a team led by Miho Nagasawa at Azabu University in Japan published a study in the journal Science that examined what happens, biochemically, when a dog and its owner simply look at each other. They placed 30 dogs and their owners in a room to interact freely for 30 minutes and measured a hormone called oxytocin, the same molecule that surges between a human mother and her infant. One of the deepest bonding chemicals in mammalian biology in the urine of both, before and after. The pairs who spent the longest in mutual eye contact showed the largest oxytocin increases in both the human and the dog. The longer the dog gazed at its owner, the more the owner's oxytocin rose. And the more the owners rose, the more the dogs did too. A loop. A feedback circuit of bonding, running between two different species through nothing but a shared gaze. Then they ran the comparison that mattered. They looked at wolves, even wolves that had been raised by humans from puppyhood. The loop was not there. The interpretation the researchers offered is staggering. Over tens of thousands of years, dogs appear to have tapped into the exact neurochemical system that binds a parent to a child, and turned it on us. When your dog looks into your eyes, it may be reaching the same part of your biology that a newborn does. Now, this is one study, and scientists are careful people. Some have questioned how far the finding generalizes, and the debate is not fully settled. But the core result is hard to shake. The love you feel for your dog is not sentimental invention. It may be the oldest bonding chemistry in mammals, redirected across the boundary between species. The dog did not just move into our homes. It moved into the part of our brains reserved for family. And if you want to know how old that is, how long ago this stopped being about scraps and survival and became about something closer to love, there is a grave. In 1914, workers quarrying basalt near Bonn, Germany, uncovered a burial that would take the better part of a century to fully understand. Inside lay two humans, a man and a woman, buried together around 14,000 years ago. And with them placed deliberately in the same grave was a dog. Not eaten, not a tool, not a sacrifice discarded at the edge, buried alongside the people, as one of them. Decades later, when a team including the veterinarian Luke Janssens re-examined the animal's remains, the bones told a harder, more human story. The dog had been young a puppy, and it had been desperately sick, showing signs of a severe bout of a disease resembling canine distemper. An illness that severe would have left the puppy unable to feed itself, unable to keep warm, useless for hunting or guarding or work of any kind. For it to have survived that illness at all, someone had to have cared for it, fed it by hand, kept it warm, nursed a sick, worthless puppy through weeks of misery, getting nothing in return but a living animal. And then, when that person died, the dog was laid in the ground with them. 14,000 years ago, before writing, before cities, before farming, before almost everything we call civilization, a human being loved a dog enough to save its life when it could offer nothing back, and then to take it into the grave so they would not be alone. Whatever the dog had become by then, it was no longer just a scavenger at the edge of the fire. It was family, and it has been ever since. So, how did humans turn a wolf into a dog? Not the way we like to imagine. There was no bold hunter who captured a wolf cub and broke it to his will. There was no moment, no inventor, no single tribe that figured it out and taught the world. What happened was slower, stranger, and far less flattering to us. At the edge of Ice Age campfires, across the plains of Eurasia, sometime between roughly 40,000 and 15,000 years ago. The friendliest wolves, the ones least afraid of us, crept closer to our garbage, ate a little better, bred a little more, and grew a little tamer with every generation. They selected themselves for the one trait that would bind them to us. We did not reach out and take the dog. The dog met us halfway, and we let it. Then, slowly, we finished what the wolves had started feeding them, breeding the calmest, shaping them to our needs. Until an animal built to compete with us became an animal built to live with us. We changed their bodies until they could eat our food. They changed our chemistry until we loved them like children. And whether it happened once or twice, in the East or the West, is a question the bones have not yet fully answered. How likely was it that a deliberate, one-time, human invention created the dog? Essentially zero. The evidence points overwhelmingly the other way, toward a gradual, mutual, accidental process, driven at least as much by the wolves as by us, and probably repeated wherever bold wolves and tolerant humans shared the same cold ground. The probability that dogs emerged from wolves domesticating themselves at the edge of human camps, rather than from humans capturing and taming them, is high, and it is the single most important correction to the story most of us grew up with. We were not the only ones doing the taming. We may not even have been the ones who started it. And tonight, somewhere close to you, one of them is asleep. By most estimates, close to 1 billion dogs are alive on Earth right now, descendants of a vanished Ice Age wolf, carrying extra copies of a gene that lets them eat our bread, wired to lock eyes with us, and flood both our brains with the same chemical that binds a mother to her child. When your dog lifts its head and looks at you across the room, that gaze is not new. It is 15,000 years old, at least. It began with a wolf at the edge of the firelight deciding, against every instinct it had, that a human was worth getting closer to. And it has been looking at us like that ever since. We think we tamed the wolf, but the wolf came to us tame, and stayed, and rewired our hearts on the way in. We did not just make the dog. The dog helped make us who we are, a species that has never, in tens of thousands of years, wanted to be alone. So the next time the animal on your floor rolls over, or waits by the door, or simply watches you cross the room, remember what you are actually looking at. Not a pet, not property. The oldest friendship our species has ever kept. A wolf that chose us. And never left. Now tell me in the comments what ordinary thing, something you have walked past 1,000 times without a second glance, should we make strange next? And there's another one waiting for you on the screen right now. I'll meet you there.